Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife. Well, it's good, isn't it? It's quite poignant, really, that our last public Mass coincides with the feast of St Joseph, and that in the middle of the Gospel that we've just heard, there should be that call to him not to be afraid. St Joseph was given by God, by the Father, to Mary and to Jesus to take care of them. He was given to reflect the Father's own care of this sacred treasure, the Virgin Mother and her Son, the Word made flesh. And the Catholic instinct is that just as Mary and Jesus were entrusted to Joseph, so the Church is throughout her history. St. John Paul II said, just as St. Joseph took loving care of Mary and gladly dedicated himself to Jesus' upbringing, he likewise watches over and protects Christ's mystical body, of which the Virgin Mary is the exemplar and model. Devotion to St. Joseph goes back a long way. I suppose, really, it began in the heart of the Holy Family itself. Surely Mary was devoted to Joseph and grateful for his presence in her life. And surely Jesus, the growing boy, appreciated the one who was given him as a father. They recognized what a gift of God was to them. And you can trace the development of this devotion through history. From the 4th century onwards, at least in Egypt, things began, it seems. Interesting, because there would have been a memory of the visit of the Holy Family to Egypt, perhaps, and still today the Coptic Christians there very much venerate the Holy Family and the time they spent in their own country. And then, 1,000 years later or so, the Franciscans took it up with their love of the mystery of the Incarnation and of the crib and of the events of Jesus' childhood. And then St. Teresa of Avila and her Carmelite sisters were very devoted to him as Joseph, as a man of interiority, of silence, and of prayer, we presume. And so the centuries passed, and in 1870, Pope St. Pius IX declared him patron of the Universal Church. In 1962, St. John the 23rd added his name to the Roman canon, our first Eucharistic prayer, and only 7 years ago, Pope Francis had his name included in the other main Eucharistic prayers as well. And in fact, it was on this feast, exactly 7 years ago, that Pope Francis began his ministry as Pope and successor of St. Peter. So it's almost as if, when, thinking back on all of that, it's almost as if St. Joseph is coming closer to us all the time. And it's as if the Lord wants us to feel the Lord's protection, his care through this good man, this just man, honorable, descendant of David, a man of faith and obedience like Abraham, someone who just quietly got on with things, the carpenter, and who's left us no words of his own, but who did what the angel of the Lord told him to do. When the angel of the Lord came to Mary, she responded with her words. She said, "I am the handmaid of the Lord," so on. Joseph didn't say anything, because it happened in the night in a dream. But in the morning, he got up and just did it. And he probably didn't put it out on Facebook, as it were, and tell 200 close friends that he was doing it. He just did what the angel of the Lord told him to do. This is Joseph then. And as the mystery of the Incarnation unfolded, As his beloved, Mary became a mother, as her child grew in wisdom and grace, there he is, entrusted with them. He must have been awed by that. And there he is now, at home in God, entrusted with the church, which in a sense is Mary, and its life, which is Christ. And surely, in this difficult and unexpected moment where we all are, he's entrusted again, anew, afresh, with us, with Mary the church, and with the life of Jesus in us, and with everyone who is, as it were, Jesus in waiting. It's a great human thing, and it's a great divine thing that St. Joseph brings with him, the protection, the watchful care of God, in the first place, above all. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High and abides in the shade of the Almighty says to the Lord, my refuge, my stronghold, my God, in whom I trust. But then there's our own imitation of it. In the first chapter of Genesis, we are told that we are created in the image and likeness of God. Much ink has been spilt on what that means, but it surely means that in some sense we're to act, we're to live, we're to behave like God himself. And in Genesis chapter 2, the man is placed in a garden to till it and to keep it. Now, that's maybe how we imitate God, by tilling, first of all, developing, cultivating the land, the garden, the tree that each of us is and human life is. Tilling it by nurture, tilling it by culture, if you like, and then by keeping it, watching over it, taking care of it, protecting it from harm. Adam was called to take care of the garden. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob took care of their families, their servants, their herds, and their flocks. David was taken from the care of the sheep to be the shepherd of the people of Israel. The priests and the Levites had care of the temple and its sacred vessels and the sacrifices that went on there, just as the priests of the New Testament have care of the Holy Eucharist and the holy oil and of the souls entrusted to them. So much of life turns around, or at least can and should, this whole notion of taking care, this imitation of God, the God who neither slumbers nor sleeps, but watches over his own people and indeed his whole creation unceasingly, night and day. So this is our vocation, really, to share in this action of God. It's our Josephite vocation, we might say. And Pope Francis said this of it 7 years ago today. The vocation of being a protector means protecting all creation, the beauty of the created world, as the book of Genesis tells us and as St. Francis of Assisi shows us. It means respecting each of God's creatures and respecting the environment in which we live. It means protecting people, showing loving concern for each and every person, especially the children, elderly, those in need, who are often the last we think about. It means caring for one another in our families. Husbands and wives first protect one another, and then as parents they care for their children, and children themselves in time protect their parents. It means building sincere friendships in which we protect one another in trust, respect, and goodness. In the end, everything has been entrusted to our protection, and all of us are responsible for it. Be protectors of God's gift. We might say, be St. Joseph. Perhaps, when we look back on our lives, We can think of people who've been like John the Baptist to us, people who've sort of provoked us or pointed us towards Christ. But there's also, surely, we've had many Josephs in our life who have protected us, fathers or grandfathers or elder brothers or teachers or mentors who have sort of kept the garden, and not just men, of course, it's not restricted to that, but it's good. How many people have protected us? When I was a boy, I let go of my mother's hand on an escalator and started rolling down a long, long escalator. And some gentleman just scooped me up and gave me back to my mother. Well, that man protected me. I don't know who he was. He was West Indian, I think, my mother said. Maybe he saved my life. So there we are. So it's a beautiful coincidence that, as sadly we abstain, it's a kind of Lent, I suppose, an aspect of Lent from public liturgies. St. Joseph is there. And we're doing this to protect each other, in fact, from illness. That's a good thing to do. It's not just compliance with civil authority, though that too has its place. It is a way of keeping the fifth commandment. But we might think of the Holy Family here. I think maybe this little thought came to me, and I'll throw it out. But to protect their lives, the lives of Jesus and Mary, from the virus of Herod, the human virus of Herod, who wanted to take Jesus' life, Joseph took Mary and Jesus away from the Holy Land, away from the temple, that meant, away from its beautiful liturgy. It was a hard thing for a Jewish person to leave the land that had been chosen by God, not to be able to go up, as they could not have gone up 3 times a year to celebrate the great feasts in the temple. But so it's a kind of, it must have been a very sad exile for them in that respect. But they had two things. I think we have them too. But they had the great Jewish tradition of family prayer, grace at table, blessing of food, the Psalms, the Bible. And so perhaps this is a moment for each of us to enhance our personal prayer, our commitment, to give ourselves a daily discipline, to read the readings of the day, for example, or commit ourselves afresh to the rosary. Somebody said to me, in fact, if you wash your hands, while you wash your hands, as we're being encouraged to do an awful lot, while you wash your hands, do it for the space of a Hail Mary. That's about the right length of time. And by the time you've done it 10 times during the day, you've said a whole decade of the rosary, just quite simply. But there it is. And on Sunday, to try and access Mass on TV or the internet, now we were hoping, and we made great efforts in this respect, to persuade the BBC to broadcast a Mass on Sunday for the whole of Scotland. But unfortunately, they've sort of stepped back from that, which is to be regretted. But there's a great deal of live streaming going on. There's a list being prepared of all the places where you can live stream Mass. And we're hoping to move through to it in this parish as well. But it would be good, be so good for every home to become this famous domestic church that these documents talk about, the domestic church. Maybe this is the first thing. This must have happened, surely, for Jesus and Mary. And then secondly, of course, they had each other. They had each other. And they were already surely a united family, but after this experience of living outside the land, they must have been so much more so. So this is a time we must look at the positive. Everything has a good side to it. This is a time for caring for each other in new ways, by prayers, by messages, by phone calls. A councillor told me the other day that he'd put out, their local council put out a call for volunteers to, be mindful of the elderly and so on, and do shopping for people and whatnot who are confined at home. And, the number of people who volunteered was amazing. They got more volunteers than they know what to do with also. And someone used the phrase, it's one of these phrases that bounces around, the new normal, the new normal. Now, wouldn't it be lovely if, caring for each other in society and in the church and in our parishes, more than we do at present. I know we try, and many people do wonderful things, but wouldn't it be wonderful if this could go up another notch and stay up and become a new normal in society and among us as Christians too? And wouldn't it be wonderful that, our homes and our houses and our dining rooms and our bedrooms and so on were places of prayer even more. So, do not be afraid. Like Adam, we are on this earth to till and keep the garden. And Joseph fulfilled this vocation supremely. He cared for, he kept the incarnate Word and his human mother. May he pray for us, and may we, with him, protect the life of Mary and of Jesus in ourselves and in one another.